Welcome everybody to the last panel of Made to Create Week. We have a really good lineup for you today. We've got people talking all about vision and live shows and what all of that entails. So I guess we'll start off with everyone introducing themselves. Let's just go as it's on the screen. So Blue, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Blue. I work as a music producer, mixer, creative director for live shows, MD, all sorts of different things. Trying to, I guess, get artist messages across and give an audience a really good time. That's it.
Nice. Dan?
Hi, yeah, I'm Dan. I create and perform live visuals for predominantly electronic musicians. Also make small music videos and do bits of design for album sleeves and things like that. In the past, and currently working with John Hopkins, Gold Panda, Midland, Factory Floor, James Holden, that kind of world of electronic music, and make sort of psychedelic nonsense for people to enjoy whilst they're at shows.
Amazing. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm a music director for Gorgon City and Otherline at the moment. I also do a bit of playback every now and then as well for sort of pop acts and things like that. So predominantly on the electronic side of things. If it's got computers and drum machines, I'm probably helping.
Nice. And Bob?
Hey, my name's Bob, and I do creative direction, video kind of art stuff. I run shows, call shows, push buttons at shows, and that kind of thing. Mainly at the moment for Fatboy Slim, who I've worked for about 8 years. And that's it.
Nice. And do you want to tell everyone why you look so different on the screen to everyone else?
I've been transported to the 70s in a hostage situation. So I'm allowed onto the internet for an hour. Yeah. Now I've as we're all in lockdown, I've got time on my hands, so I decided to break a vintage camera out and rescan an old TV that's being fed by the camera. Yeah.
Nice.
That's why.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for joining us, you guys, and for everyone else that's watching. I think we're going to dive straight in. So one thing that I really wanted to cover was your jobs are all amazing, and you've worked with some really amazing people. How on earth did you get there? Like, I want to know, like how you started, what made you want to become what you're doing now. So Blue, should we start with you again?
Yeah, great. So I guess I started playing guitar and various instruments at a young age, and sort of quickly got into music production and writing and playing in bands. When I left school, I started sort of sessioning as a guitarist, and very quickly, I think because of the experience I'd had playing a lot of bands at school, sort of got got promoted in as the kind of MD to some bands pretty quickly, and so it was kind of accidental how I ended up kind of working on live shows and helping sort of the overall picture of it all get made. But yeah, I've had a really varied career, and a lot of it's kind of been accidental in a lot of ways. It's just kind of, I guess, like having the energy to really try and push people's ideas as far as they can go. And I guess kind of picking up a lot of different sort of different strands of experience, and being someone who can like kind of interface between a lot of different sections of people, be it musicians or artists or, you know, lighting people or visual people. So yeah, how I got my start, I'm not fully sure. It's just kind of saying yes to a lot of things and always kind of listening and learning as much as possible. So yeah, that's about it.
Nice. What about you, Tom? Dan, sorry.
That's okay. So I studied fine art. I've got a background in fine art painting, and during my fine art course, more interested in moving image, and started shooting lots of stuff on 8mm film. And buddies of mine were putting on DJ nights in Norwich, where I was studying, and invited me down just to project the films over the back of the DJs. And that was kind of where it sort of started, and got a bit bored just watching a film go from one end of the reel to the other, and then thought, well, maybe I can start interfering with it, and started getting multiple projectors and putting my hands over the lenses and kind of doing a weird box rave for about 4 hours, kind of cutting Super 8 film to the beat. And then a few years after that, someone showed me a laptop, and that it was a little bit easier to do that with video clips, and you could experiment with it. And one of those people I was at art school with was a musician called Luke Abbott. He got signed to Border Community, James Holden's label, so I got to meet James, Nathan Fake, then met John Hopkins through Nathan and James. So everything kind of sort of spiraled, and like, you know, what Blue was saying, you just sort of say yes to stuff, and kind of before you know it, like fine art painting is a distant memory, and suddenly you're projecting visuals at a festival instead. So, you know, it's just, you know, twists and turns.
Nice. And you, Tom?
I think there's probably a lot of parallels, and there probably will be a lot of parallels in all of our stories, where we kind of all had a thing that we were interested in, and we just went and did it. Because, I mean, similar to Blue, I was in bands and stuff when I was a kid, and when I was growing up as a teenager, just kind of playing music with whoever would play music with me. And one of those bands brought me to London, which is kind of where opportunities just started to happen. It's just kind of lucky to meet the right people at the right time, and just said yes to a lot of things. And then before you know it, you know, you're on tour all over the world, and you're like, how did that happen? Like last year, I was just in a really crap little flat thinking it was all going to go to shit. And then all of a sudden I'm out with like these amazing artists, helping them make amazing experiences for people. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of it, you know.
Lovely. And Bob?
Yeah, like Tom said, I think there's a lot of parallels with mine and Dan's story. I too went to university on a fine art degree. I too messed around with Super 8. I started off making sculptures out of wax and kind of tar. And I used to get very dirty. And the studio that I was working in, the fine art studio, had a kind of a Mac Classic that had asteroids on it. And so instead of going and getting dirty, I used to go up and sit and play asteroids. And once I'd beaten the top score that the print technician had, I started learning how to do Photoshop on a very first version of Photoshop. And then skip forward, I then left university with some actual skills. Not a lot of fine art students actually do, but I then went on to teach teachers creative approaches to technology. So it was teachers that would kind of that were having problems integrating technology into their artistic practice, and I was there to sort of hustle them towards it. And then once I left university, I started getting involved in the music industry a little bit. I ended up going and doing a show with a friend called Layla Arab, who was signed to Warp, and we did a sonar, and she was friends with a band called Plaid. And in 2001, I went out on tour on my first tour with them when video projectors were as bright as, I don't know, your watches probably now. And I used to have to go and beg the bar to switch off all their bar lights because it was so weak. Yeah, and then it just went from one step to another, where I started off doing work with electronic musicians, all the way through to bands like the Go Team, who are very vibrant, big kind of energy, and it was about capturing that energy on stage rather than kind of supplying something that was behind some electronic musicians that were playing in front, to obviously working for the last 8 years with Norman, who is a massive energy, you know, he's like a rave vampire who sits in the middle and whips the kind of whips the energy in and then feeds off it, and lighting and video and the audio department all there to kind of, you know, just sit on top of that energy. Yeah, so that's kind of how I went, sort of like a similar to Dan.
Nice. Yeah. So yeah, there's some similarities and there's also some differences. It's really interesting to hear, you know, all the journeys that you've taken. So with that kind of in mind of kind of explaining to people these long, like, great journeys that you've been on, these big stories and stuff. When it really comes down to it, day to day, what would that look like for you? So like a normal Monday morning, where some people might be driving to work, some people might be going to an office. What does that day look like for you in terms of your work? We'll start with Tom.
It's always different. I don't think it's ever been the same. I don't have like a Monday morning routine. It'll depend. Like if we're in the middle of a tour, is it like the first day off in 2 or 3 weeks, or if we're working on a show, is that kind of where we're getting together our programming from the previous week and figuring out like what we're going to do this week, what arrangements do we need to work on, is there drum samples that need to be cut up for drum electronics or whatever, or if I'm lucky, I'm sleeping until 12. So it's like super varied, and I don't think anyone in a creative industry will really have a normal sort of Monday morning routine.
Okay, cool. Dan.
Sure. I mean, similar. Yeah. Again, there's a good parallel here, as we're going to keep touching on. But I mean, that's one of the interesting things about this lockdown period, is it actually has sort of enabled some kind of routine in my life, because it's very unusual for me to have not left the country in like the last 6 months of the year, kind of thing. But often. Your beginning of the week, you might be traveling back from weekend shows. The work I do with electronic musicians is usually like a weekend run of 2 or 3 shows, not like a 2 or 3 week tour that hits several dates. We might just do a couple of European shows over a weekend. So Monday would often be coming back from that, and then it would be sort of cleaning and prep and thinking ahead to what's there. But always researching into new kit or new processes, or like tidying up an edit of something, like always like a little tweak that, particularly working with John Hopkins, like he's an absolute perfectionist. So he's put that kind of work ethic into me as well. So I'm always looking at, reviewing the past shows and thinking, where can I find like a better way of doing this? Or is there a moment I've missed, I haven't accented, or something like that? So yeah, it's always a varied experience, and kind of grateful for that. Like, there's definitely good days and bad days. And if you have a bad day, it's important to remember all the good days.
And Bob?
Again, similar. If there's always 2 sides. It's either, if you're on tour, your days are very, very different to when I'm in the studio. If I'm in the studio, it means I'm at home. I'm doing family stuff. I'm taking my daughter to school on the way to the studio. Then I tend to sort of, maybe go to the gym, kind of read something, and then just start trying to make things. It's very difficult to motivate yourself when you haven't really got a focus in terms of a project. On tour, it's totally different, depending on whether or not you're on tour or on the bounce, whether you're going from one show to another. You're usually trying to sleep, because sleep is a premium, or you're trying to eat, or you're setting up, or you're breaking down the show, or you're traveling, or you're having some kind of drink at a bar after a show. So those are the kind of 2 phases, and I kind of like that. I like that balance of going out on a road and being a little bit of a rave monster, and the process of actually creating work in a studio and having a little bit of a normal life. So those are that's kind of how it goes. Cool.
And Blue?
Yeah, super varied. Obviously, same thing. I think the theme for me on a sort of daily level is sort of similar to what Bob was saying. It's like, it's about trying to find like intense motivation all the time, and being a kind of creative mindset. It's like a lot of the ideas that kind of get realized 6 months later or a year later come from the moments when you're sort of doing nothing, whether it's sort of laying in bed at night or waking up in the morning. It's like those kind of, the spare time is where for me I can sort of think most abstractly, but But in order to kind of be in that space, you sort of have to have an intensity about your life, and feel excited to get up in the morning. You know, it's like, to me, like, life is like two things. It's the kind of, it's the lack of ideas, and it's the ideas, you know. It's like, and that's my battle on a daily basis. Is I always want to stay in that place where you wake up in the morning, you want to jump out of bed, you want to go straight for it, and you've got ideas flowing, versus the days where you want to stay in bed. And I think that's kind of, especially in this moment with, you know, lockdown and all the kind of things going on, that's what's kind of challenging, is to try and sort of keep that intensity of thought process and stuff, I guess. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does. And I like that you touched on like staying inspired with kind of like all that's going on around the world. So I guess I'll lead on and ask, how have you guys stayed inspired? Because obviously a lot of you aren't out on live shows at the moment. How are you like at home, staying inspired, still working? Talk to me about how you guys have been kind of dealing with that and feeling about it. I'm going to start with Bob.
Yeah. Well, kind of having to move studios. I'm downstairs in the store where all the flight cases are kept for the live show for Norman right now. But I moved back home, and my daughter gracefully gave me a little corner of her room. So I kind of took a little desk and set up a little computer in the corner of her room, and started learning a little bit of Python, started learning a little bit of generative AI creation. So that's how I kind of stayed focused, was not letting myself kind of get swayed into or fall into some sort of trap of having this kind of big gas of things that you should be doing. I just gave myself a task, which is to make some things using artificial intelligence, and I also started sorting out my hard drives, which I'm still doing, which is a mad task. It's I've got 35 terabytes worth of data that I'm now shuffling Tetris-like from one place to another. So, you know, if you ever tidy something, you kind of have to have a room to put it all in, so then you can bring it all back kind of one bit after another. So my daughter's room is full of labeled hard drives that she looks at, and she finds my names for hard drives very, very funny.
Dan?
Well, yeah, similarly, I've been dealing with these guys. Finally, I mean, you know, I've no idea what's on these, but you know, that's the inbox. Taking a moment to kind of really like deal with all the stuff, all the kind of admin that is just too chaotic, because, like, you know, it sounds really silly to talk about hard drives, but like if I'm developing a new show on the run, on tour, like I just buy another one. Like I don't really have the opportunity or the mind space to like organize things and shuffle it around and check stuff. Just panic, buy another one, copy it, and then end up with hundreds of these things when I could be a lot more efficient with money and hard drives and stuff. But you know, more importantly than that, I've been taking a lot of time to learn, again, like Bob's saying, like learn skills that I've been ignoring. You can see behind me, like I've got the video modular set up here. And, you know, that's largely ignored because that's not something I often tour with. So it was really nice to sort of spend time going in there. And also, I've been working with a couple of different musicians to create more kind of ambient and meditative pieces. So things that we don't kind of really get a chance to deal with, like, you know, we're talking about the energy of a live show where you have to kind of entertain and excite people. But now it's been like an opportunity to focus down and think about what other aspects are there to music and visual interaction that we can explore. So there's a couple of things like in the works that should be coming out in the next month or so. So it's been a, you know, unfortunate time in many ways, but also like quite positive to just flip your energy. And I say that kind of exhaustion of bouncing around hotel rooms and things like that is nice to redirect that energy into making something that's more constructive and more solid.
Nice. What about you, Tom?
I kind of contradictively haven't actually done any music at all for the past 3 months. I haven't thought about gigs. I haven't thought about live music. I haven't thought about producing. I didn't open Ableton at all. And I actually found it quite therapeutic because it's not often in a particularly live music career that you get an opportunity to just stop for 3 months and not answer any emails from production managers or artists or, you know, music managers or agents or anyone who like wants something from you, and just kind of step away and look at it and go, okay, so what was I actually doing? Like, what ideas were good, what ideas were bad? Like, also learning loads of new stuff. I've also been learning some new stuff. I was getting involved with some Python as well, like Bob did. I'm kind of super inspired by some of the people who've done interesting like control surface scripts for Ableton Live with the Launchpad. So I was like, do you know what? Like, I'm interested in Python. Let's give it a go, see if there's something new that can happen with that. But much with when learning any new skill, you end up in a bit of a rabbit hole that leads you to other places. And before I knew it, I was like not doing any music. And yeah, man, I'm back in my studio now. This is kind of the second day I've been back in the studio, and it feels really fresh. And I'm looking at everything, and I'm like feeling really driven to do some music stuff. And some artists have started talking about doing live shows next year. So yeah, I think trying to be inspired just by music is sometimes a mistake. I always thought that you need to be in a very musical environment, but I think creativity is broader than that. At least that's what I've learned over lockdown, but I could be wrong.
Sure. And Blue, I know you kind of already answered most of this question. Do you have anything to add about how you've been kind of keeping creative and staying motivated?
Yeah, I mean, I work sort of predominantly as a music producer and mixer anyway, and the live stuff is sort of kind of has always kind of come in unexpectedly around that. So that kind of side to a certain extent has still been ongoing, although, you know, it has been super quiet for the last few months. But I think similarly to what everyone else is saying is that, like, you know, I just haven't, I think the first month was like, oh my God, you know, keep yourself really busy. And I started, like, you know, building furniture and just not music related stuff, but still kind of doing that kind of mad, you know, let's work for 12 hours and you know, because it was sort of like, it's like an addiction, that stuff, you know, that sort of intensity. And then I think I finished a project building a dining table, and you know, that was the first 2 weeks of lockdown, and then I sort of really crashed for a few days because I'd sort of finished this project. I didn't know what my next project was, and I didn't feel like going and making music, even though I thought I should. And you know, I signed a publishing deal last year, and in the back of my head, I'm like, God, I've got to write songs. We've got loads of free time now. I should write 1 million songs because I've got, you know, I've got to live up to this money that someone's given me, all this kind of stuff. And I think after a little while, I just kind of went like, just give yourself a break, you know. And it's like, and that's kind of where I've been for for what turns out to be quite a long time now. And I think there's sort of days where I worry about, like, I think you have these kind of insecurities where you're like, God, I hope I can get that intensity back. And I hope I've still got that ability to kind of, you know, go really hard and not, you know, basically I hope I'm not lazy now. You know what I mean? But I think in hindsight, I think we'll all kind of look back at this time and you know, I've spent loads of time with friends. I spent loads of time with my girlfriend. You know, it might feel crazy right now, but I think in a year's time, I think we'll all be really thankful for that time, you know. So that's kind of it. So,
yeah. I appreciate that.
Making history. So kind of going back to brighter times, I guess, talking about shows again. I want to touch on the processes that you guys go through when you have a new show on the horizon. So you've had an artist ring you, they've given you their vision. What is it that you then do to get in the zone and get that done? We'll start with Dan.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, so if I'm working with a musician, then I guess it's slightly different if it's someone that I've got an existing relationship with, that maybe it's more helpful to give an example of someone that I haven't previously worked with before, because, you know, worked with some people for nearly 10 years, so you get this little shorthand and you understand exactly what they're thinking when they describe stuff. But obviously for me to try and visualize someone's music is quite a challenge. I'm sure Bob can come and give comment on this as well. That people have something very fixed in their mind, and they're trying to describe that through like a mood board or language or something like that. So it's kind of my job to be like a channel, to really be a conduit for working out what their vision is, mix it with my skills, style, expertise, and kind of wrap it into something that is then presentable to an audience. Spend a lot of time listening to the music. Often ask them for stems as well, so I can kind of delve really into the different layers of the music. So you can kind of hear how the melody is working with a percussive element and things like that. But yeah, generally start making some sketches and making some video tests, editing 2 studio tracks, and then you start with a back and forth of is this kind of hitting the mark? Is this going to work? And working out when it's important to be subtractive as well as additive. So you don't always just want to keep layering strobes and flashy things and kaleidoscopic stuff. Sometimes you've got to pull things back. And different artists have quite different ambitions. That many of the people I work with have a sort of modern psychedelia angle to their vision for what the stage show should look like. But when I was working with Blank Mass, for instance, he kind of gave me the brief of gross with glitter. So kind of wanted things to be glam but disgusting. And that was like a really interesting thing to get into. And at the end of the Road Festival in, I think, 2017, we managed to mass repulse an audience. So, it's an interesting kind of dynamic there when you show endoscopy footage and time it to a bass drum attack and, freak people out in a big top. So, it's kind of interesting to kind of get into, the artist mindset and get a little bit under their skin. So, I guess it's a bit like, to use a music analogy, I guess it's a bit like a bassist and a drummer. You kind of need to knit a little bit like that and just be the kind of backbone of a live show. So that's kind of how I sort of view it, that you're a very close collaborator and conspirator to kind of pull a live show off.
Nice. And I guess, Tom, you're probably going to have some quite interesting stuff here, because your job obviously isn't so much about visuals, it's about the music and the live performance. So would you like to take it from here?
Yeah, I mean, when first you got to listen to the album, you got to listen to the material. And if there's no material, there's not going to be any show. You'd be surprised how many new artists I've talked to have been like, yeah, let's build a show. And I'm like, cool, play us the album. And they're like, here's a track. You're like, guys, we need a 45-minute performance here. I can't just loop that forever. But I'll generally, before, at least with shows that I'm working on, before approaching the visual and lighting side of things, I'll try and work closely with the artist to get kind of like a map of what we're going to do. Try and get some basic arrangements down, even if it's not like the kind of end product with production stuff. At least kind of we're going to be doing this for 8 bars, we're going to be doing this for 16 bars, that kind of thing. So you can start putting sketches in place and start having those creative conversations and building those mood boards, like Dan said. So I kind of work quite hard on that with them and try not to give anyone anything until, on the kind of music side of things, we're all happy in our camp and yeah, cool, this isn't going to change too much. Because the worst thing that you can do is say, oh, do you know what? We're going to put a bar from here, and it's in the a long section, and then leave your video guy pulling his hair out, because that's actually quite a complicated process at that point. And we were thinking, nah, you just drop a bar out in Ableton, don't worry about it, mate. They're like, no, we're rendering a 3D environment or something. That's quite a lot of work. So yeah, I think it's important just to stage things in a logical way, and everybody has a different way of working. So it's just about having that kind of conversation to make sure that you can have like a fluid and constructive working relationship with the team around an artist. But yeah.
Nice. Blue?
Yeah, so I guess it starts with getting to know the artist, both sort of musically and personally. Especially if they've sort of toured before, people have generally got sort of things they loved and things they hated about touring their previous shows. So getting a good understanding of that. Obviously, listen to the music and starting to kind of get your immediate thoughts out about what that about how you see it, and then sort of bringing those conversations together between an artist and your own ideas. And as soon as you kind of got and I guess part of that conversation with an artist is I think it's about, a lot of times for me, I think it's about explaining to them just how much is possible. It's like I think if you're whether you're a music producer or a creative director or MD, you have the language, and so it's on you to go, yeah, look, you can do that. This is what it takes. This is the personnel, this is the tech, this is and you're basically sort of given a roadmap and going like, if you want this is what it takes. And then once you kind of come to that conclusion, I'd say the sort of next step is about team. A lot, most of the shows I'm involved in involve, a lot of different musicians. I'd say most of the shows I've done are kind of very based on having musicians on stage still, and it's kind of picking the right personnel to kind of keep on sort of strengthening this person and strengthening what the show can be, and from there, trying to oversee every part of it and trying to keep a consistency through the language of how you communicate to the musicians, how you communicate to the visual people and the tour manager and the production manager and the venues, and ultimately hope to end up somewhere where the show is incredible and it moves people, and people that have given up an hour of their time or whatever, go home, feeling kind of, just radically uplifted, hopefully. That's it. So, yeah.
Sure. And Bob, what about you?
Yeah, kind of moving on from Blue's chit chat. It's finding a common language between the artist and what they want to achieve. It's sometimes difficult when you have a new relationship, because it's sort of like a little dance. You dance around each other trying to find out exactly kind of whether or not you're going to fit. So a lot of the time it's like planting seeds. It's showing them little bits of work, showing them bits of shows that you like, or teasing the information of the stuff that you don't like. A lot of artists will only react when you make something. So they're reactive rather than proactive. So really, I think your job as a creative director when you're working in a team is to try and tease the most information out of the artist that you're working with. So when you actually make something, it's closer to what they want, rather than constantly having 700 different revisions where the artist actually just ends up accepting it because they've spent the money on it. So I think that's the key thing, is to get them to get them to give up their secrets. And a lot of the time it's a very personal relationship with the artist that you have to develop. So I think kind of communication with the artist is key, and also understanding the technical part of how everything works, because a lot of the time you as a creative director are the kind of bridge between those worlds. The artist knows what the artist kind of like knows. They know how to make their thing beautiful, and but they don't particularly know how to make the thing that may be in their head, or maybe they want you to make, into an actual real thing. And what you need to do is to create a little bridge between all the technical and all the creative part and to the artist that you're working for. So I guess those are the kind of considerations.
Nice.
That's really well put, Bob.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to follow on from that. Actually, you were talking about the way that you've been approaching things. What's your favorite project that you've worked on, whether it be recently or a little while ago? What's your kind of like the one that really sticks out in your head that you always think that you want to emulate in the future?
Who's that to?
Bob, sorry.
Me. Funnily enough, I kind of I hooked up the show mixer to this stream, so I can actually show you some stuff. I did say that I was working on StyleGAN 2 AI models, and the way they work is that you create a data set, and a data set is kind of like maybe 10,000 to 20,000 images. And then you feed it into a machine learning kind of computer, to put it simply. And then it sits there and it cogitates and sits there and brews this tea, and you tend to it. And kind of, now and again, you come back and look at it. And then it essentially, at different points, it will show you what it thinks of what you've given it. So what I'm going to show you now quickly is a thing that I made. So that you're looking at is a data set of 8,000 flowers. And so the computer now thinks that it knows how to make flowers. And then it can make these flowers infinitely, like forever. So essentially what we're doing there is kind of looking through latent space, it's called. And we're flying through different vectors, they're called, of latent space. So each one of those is a flower that doesn't exist. I also did it with Star Trek as well. So I put 4 episodes of my favorite Star Trek in there, and it kind of I like the idea that it boiled down to the essence of Star Trek. And it looks like you're watching Star Trek on ketamine as well, which is also it's also a top plus. Yeah, it's also a top plus point for me. So those are the things that I've been really interested in. And the same as Dan, I've been heavily kind of going back to, not that I left using analog material. So I've been doing a lot of rescanning, hence what I'm doing now with this feed, using a lot of magnets, distorting images, those kind of things. So when I'm in my off tour, I'm experimenting in the studios with physical things, because I really like the whole thing of bringing physical things back into the computer, messing around with them, and then taking them maybe back into the physical domain. Because I just sometimes sitting in front of a computer for 12 hours in a big session, I get crazy bags. And plus, if you want a family life, if you go back and you're a little bit frazzled, you're a bit fizzy, as my daughter says. She knows when I've been going hard and editing hard, so I tend to try and balance it up. So that's kind of what's been occupying me, is making Star Trek on ketamine and flowers on ketamine.
Looks great. Looks really cool. What about you, Blue?
Favorite project? I mean, my sort of longest running relationship is with Kano. We've worked together since 2007, and the last sort of 12 months have kind of been, the result of that long relationship, really, because we made, myself, Kano, and another guy called Jody, made the last Kano records over 3 years, and going from that straight on to kind of design the live show, and seeing those songs played in front of 5,000 people at Royal Albert Hall. I mean, that Royal Albert Hall show is without a shadow of a doubt the best show I've ever been involved in. And we had 40 musicians on stage by the end, and a phenomenal light show. And it was like it felt like a moment. It was like it wasn't just a moment for the people on stage. I think collectively something happened that night that kind of made a mark for everyone that was there. And I think it's not that it's not possible to kind of achieve that every night in, night out. Some nights you just do the show and it works great, but ultimately that kind of little extra something wasn't there, and that's fine. but those moments that are kind of where you just know that everyone left it out on the floor, that's what makes it worth it for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Tom?
I think my favourite shows so far is the last Gorgon City album tour, because it was kind of touching on a bit of what you said earlier, Bob, with finding that moment with that artist where they trust you and you've built that kind of bridge, that language that all you guys were talking about. I felt like that album was the first time they really trusted me to be like, all right, Tom, you've got some ideas. Tell us what the ideas are and let's give some of them a go. And I suggested some pretty insane shit, because it's album 2. We'd been doing the show for sort of 5 years. It was like it was at the point where we needed to pull it apart, put it back together again, and figure out like what it was going to be moving forward. So we took some big risks and did some pretty risky things that you don't really do in a dance show. I also feel like it grew up from being a gig to an actual show, where they were just a bunch of people on stage playing songs, and that campaign, it really became like, here's the visual element which works with the musical element, because we've given the arrangement to visuals and lights and said, look, here's some moments for it to go dark and go bright, and like you don't have to second guess that. We're trying to make that really obvious. And I encourage the boys to kind of do a list of notes of the whole show and be like, this is kind of what we want to get away with and what we want to try and achieve. And I think we did it. And we then took some of that and did it at Coachella, and it seemed to go down well. Managers were happy, agents were happy. I mean, even the manager had input in that show. It was a real meeting of everybody who was part of that gig. So it became quite a special show, to be honest. But yeah, that was definitely my favorite.
And
but
did you find it? Oh.
Sorry, no, but that's
okay.
taken. That up until that point, it was 5 years of doing gigs together, and building those relationships and building that trust to finally then be like, let's take this seriously and let's do something really interesting. But yeah.
Tom, sorry, I was going to say, Tom, was that the show that you did in Brixton Academy?
No, that wasn't the Brixton Academy show.
Okay.
It was more recent than that. I don't think we did Brixton Academy on this run.
Okay, because that I think Brixton Academy looked good. I was just wondering whether you were involved in that, which I guess you were, because it was a live show. Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember, when was that Brixton show?
I saw a couple of clips and they looked lush.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a cool show. I feel like we got the latest album. I feel like we did a much better job, but
yeah, who's to say?
The only question that I had on top of that, Tom, was with you explaining the kind of different approach that you had to that show, with having like managers involved, and having the artists really involved, and your input being quite heavy. Did you find it easier doing that? Was that like a preferred approach to you?
Oh no, the manager came up with some bullshit idea of having the gear that fucking wheeled out in the middle of the gig, and I thought it was total trash to start off with. I was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? It's going to cost us a huge amount of money. It's not going to fit on most of the stages. Why the bloody hell are we doing this? And he kind of kept pushing and kept pushing and kept pushing, and then eventually played the manager card, which he kind of, I'd already had the argument with him. I couldn't I couldn't sack it off anymore. But the thing is, like, he really pushed for that, and I then had an idea for one of the kind of album tracks because it was quite chilled out. I was like, why don't we turn that into an absolute techno banger and just stick the vocal sample in there? And then this weird bit where we're rolling out gear, we'll just do like this kind of mad techno jam with that. And it turned out to be one of the boys' favorite parts of the show and the drummer's favorite part of the show. And, the visuals were great. The lights were great. It gave us a moment to like completely black the stage out. And then we went and did it at Coachella, and everybody was like, that bit's amazing. How did you come up with that bit? And I was like, it's a fucking manager's idea. But, I think that's one of those great things about teams, is someone's going to come up with something that you think is total bollocks, right? they just say, just give it a go, just give it a go. And then you go and do it, and you realize that that was a brilliant idea. And all we needed was that little extra push to do something we weren't particularly comfortable with in the first place. And you just create great things, because you never really know. Like, you never know what idea is going to be good or what's going to be bad, especially when you're in the scope of these big kind of gigs where you need 500 ideas to get 5 good ones, because that's kind of how it works, at least in my experience.
I think that interacting with teams thing is really important, especially as the gigs get bigger as well. You know, there's so much of that as part of the job. I think, like, you know, I think, you know, managers they're always looking at things in a certain way. Rightfully for their artists, they're trying to, you know, make sure they're not overexposed, but also make sure that they're sort of doing, you know, going out at the right level that pushes them forward and makes them bigger and stuff. And I think as the kind of primary creative in between everyone else and the artist, I think it's a really important task, and one that I definitely feel like I'm always evolving and learning more about. Have certainly got it wrong a number of times, is sort of how to kind of take all that on board, you know, when to push back and when to be really firm on stuff and committed to ideas. And, you know, there's always, it's so expensive touring, you know, to do things at a serious level. You know, every person you add to the tour, every big bit of gear, it all, you know, and the artists I work for, that, you know, it's all coming from their own pocket. It's not like limitless supplies of tour support and stuff like that. And I think that's one of the really important parts that probably people don't talk about a lot, is that beyond all the creative stuff, there's also got to be a kind of a commitment to trying to sort of find the right level where you've pushed it as far as you can and not been limited by unimaginative people who are only looking at the budget. Doing as much as you can with what you've been given, but then also knowing when to push it further, and also knowing when someone's saying, look, we can't afford this, to kind of immediately go back and put your kind of creative hat on again and kind of go, well, okay, well, how can we do something just as, you know, impactful within the realms of what we're able to do? Because, you know, there's no tour in the world that's not got some kind of glass ceiling in terms of budget and stuff like that, you know. So, and in my experience, I'll always push it right to the edge. I don't know about anyone else. So, yeah.
We're definitely here to spend your money rather than save your money.
100%.
So what's your favourite project that you've been involved with, Dan?
I mean, it's a couple of things. I mean, I think in terms of nailing and perfecting a show, when we got to do John Hopkins' show at Brixton, end of 2018. And I'd been working with John for 8 or 9 years, and we'd gone from doing 2 gigs a year together to spending every weekend together, and then being able to sell out 2 nights at Brixton where we could really just like absolutely nail every element of it. And being able to add lasers in, worked with a great guy called Rob Stanley, who's amazing, and just put loads of tiny little details in that I think, you know, 80% of the audience might not have noticed. That the animator that did the visuals for John's track Emerald Rush, there's a scene in a cave and light ricochets off these crystals, and we just did like a 1-second laser bounce where the lasers mirrored exactly what was happening in the animation and just shot out over the audience, and you could see people tapping their mate on the shoulder, going, wow, did you see that? But it had gone. And then, you know, that was just like those lovely little moments that never repeated themselves. And again, for the track Light Through the Veins of his, like, it's this big sort of euphoric crescendo towards the end of the show. I was working with the lighting designer, David Ross, and I was getting him to use every color, which breaks all the rules of lighting design, like 2 tracks per color, limited movement. I was like, no, we're going to get like all the LED fixtures. They're going to run all the lights as possible, all the colors, like just more, and then lasers like going it, and like lighting designers going, not going to work. And then like, and then we just ran the test in Brixton during soundtrack, and he was just like, bugger me, I think you've invented new colors, which was like, you know, everything. One of the you had to just like kitchen sink it and just give everything kind of full beans. They're those rare moments when everything kind of kicks off. But that's certainly the example of where things kind of have been refined. But I also love the really raw shows as well. So when I worked with a band called Factory Floor, they were a 3-piece at the time, electronic, so guitars, synths, and a live drum machines, and they played fully improvised sets, and I was just using a really simple analog video synth and getting lost in the moment, improvising with the band. The band didn't know what they were doing. I was just sort of listening and watching the drummer's body language for when he was going to go for a fill or a break or something like that. And that was just like, that energy is amazing when you're just in the wings of the stage. No one can see you, but you're kind of just in the zone between 3 band members. So they're kind of the like sort of extremes of show type, but give you the same kind of adrenaline and endorphin rush of when things are exciting and know you're kind of connecting with an audience.
Super. So I know that Bob had something that he wanted to bring to this discussion, and I think all of you also have your own little stuff. So Bob, would you like to come forward with your discussion?
Yeah, I was just going to ask the gentleman how they deal with IP in terms of when you're creating stuff, and how that whole process works with your relationships with managers and artists. In terms of, is that a kind of contracted thing? Is it a handshake thing? Is it never mentioned? Yeah, so that was the question in terms of visual creation. I know that Tom and Blue, in terms of music, is going to be a very different thing, because that's very much more something that's actually been thought about, and there are things in place. But for visuals and visual creations, it doesn't seem like there's that many. So how do you handle it?
Myself? Yeah,
go for it, Dan.
Sure. I mean, like quite simply, 90% of the time it's done on trust. Up until 2018, I'd never signed a contract in my life, and I'd done everything always on a handshake. And again, that's talking about the tight relationships you build with artists, like you were saying, Bob, about getting to understand people. I often think it's like a dysfunctional marriage, kind of working with the musician, that you have this sort of strange, intimate relationship, but there's a very business element to it as well. But yeah, I've never sort of really had any serious issues with it. And the only stuff that I have signed a contract for and signed over my rights to things was with John's latest show. But as I've said before, like I have such a long-standing relationship with John and his managers have been the same throughout his whole career. So I've known the managers the same amount of time. And, you know, basically there's no qualms about me using anything on social media or like in my show reel or something like that. It's all done with a blessing and a trust and understanding that like you'll treat with things responsibly, because like it's going to be, you know, in both our interests to make sure that it's not disrespected in any way. I guess one issue that I run into is that it's quite difficult sometimes for me to post some of the work that I've been doing on YouTube and other channels, because it gets a content recognition flag, and obviously I'm not the rights holder for any of the audio, so that's always a bit of a tricky thing to negotiate. You know, I haven't managed to successfully negotiate any of that, but it's more negotiating how do I present my work online, but without the audio when it's like inexplicably linked to the audio. So that's kind of a bit of a sticky situation, which I'd love to kind of hear your input on as well, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's difficult. I've sort of abandoned YouTube with anything musical related. So you either stick it on Instagram or you stick it on Vimeo. Those are the two sort of platforms that I show my work on that has music. Otherwise, you could always go to Audio Networks and put some really whack Fireflies from Audio Networks. I don't know if you know that one. You know Fireflies?
I think I do. Yeah, I think I've come across it.
It's amazing. I want to make a documentary about Fireflies and like who's used it in what situation.
It's like the almond break. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my phone. That's my phone ringtone. My daughter knows the almond break, which is good. Means that I'm being a good dad. How about you, Blue? On that tip.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one because I guess it's not very well protected, or in terms of like, you know, you are assigning this enormous amount of sort of creative vision to something, and you know, depending on how you're getting paid and what your deal is, it can vary. I guess how that's kind of accounted for. I just try and find the right level for every project, you know, in terms of, you know, what I earn and what I get out of it, versus what I put into it. And in terms of sort of idea ownership, I guess, you know, the more recently that, you know, all the shows I've been involved in for the last few years, I've been overseeing the visual side as well as the music side. And I think when you're kind of getting into, I guess, the visual side, I feel like that side is a little bit more adept at kind of sort of dealing with things like creative fees, you know, one-time creative fees that are outside of day rates. Certainly in my experience, that doesn't really exist on the music side too much. Like, you know, it's like you kind of, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tricky. I mean, as a music producer and a mixer, it's easy because, you know, it's all kind of there. It's like if you mix something, you're going to get some royalties. If you produce something, you're going to get some publishing and some songwriting, etc., all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I think maybe it's sort of unfair in the long run. But I feel like when you get live shows right, it feels like such a kind of valid expression in general that I kind of probably don't spend too much of my time thinking about whether I'm getting all of my dues or something like that. You know what I mean? But maybe it's something we should be thinking about. I don't know. Yeah.
How about you, Tom?
I mean, there's not really a blueprint, I don't think, for any sort of creative role. And especially when you get into it, you don't ever understand where the money comes from properly until you start moving into places where there's quite a lot of money and you start seeing where that kind of floats about. So far, I just do day rates and I'm kind of happy with that. You know, I make, you know, good enough money to do the things that I want to do, to have my studio, to buy the odd synthesizer. I'm happy with that as compensation for giving out my ideas to these artists. You know, the reality is I'm not a producer who's, you know, making records that are then going and being sold and licensed and stuff. I was talking to a music director friend the other day who was saying that actually when you're arranging things for live shows, in a sense, it's kind of remixing things. So what you can be doing with the music side of things is claiming PPL on them when they're performed in venues, if they're registered as different like arrangements of the original track. Obviously, you know, all the main kind of rights then belong to the artist and the writers and the producers and all of that. But then you kind of add as a remixer and you can claim a bit of extra from that. I mean, I haven't done that. I literally only learned this like a week ago. I'm not sure if it's like totally true or not. It's something that I've been trying to kind of look into. So I don't know, like the music side of things, there's some really tight laws in music and really tight systems on how people distribute that money. So I guess it's like, where do you fit in with live? Live's a bit of a wild west. And I think that's across the board. So everybody makes their own deal. And I've heard of some lucrative deals and heard of some really poor deals, you know, people getting really ripped off. So unfortunately at the moment, I think it's a bit every man for themselves. You know, I know some music directors who are doing, you know, show retainers, and that's a model where they'll take on sort of 15 acts and then over the summer we'll be making stupid amounts of money per day for sitting at home while they all go out to festivals, and kind of, I guess that's a way of compensating for the creative input. But I don't think you can do 15 different gigs and get into a good enough headspace to make any sort of like any constructive you know, extra creative kind of input to that. But that's just my personal opinion. But yeah, mate, it's the Wild West. How does anyone get paid, really? Like, I've certainly never signed a contract either, Dan. Like,
Yeah, okay, it's good to know.
I don't even think they exist, do they? What are contracts?
Blue, have you signed a contract for the stuff that you do?
Yeah, but all the kind of main live shows I do are kind of, long-standing personal relationships, like you guys have said. It's like, and it's never formal or anything like that. I think as in relation to sort of someone like Kano, where I started out as, in 2007, I was literally, playing guitar as a 21-year-old in his band, and then sort of saw very quickly that rehearsals were chaos, and by default kind of became his music director, because I just happened to kind of pluck up the courage to kind of go up to his manager and say, hey, I think I know how to sort a few of these things out. It's like, and in that sense, it's like, I think my fee went up from 150 per show to 175 per show, to take on all the MD stuff. You know what I mean? Like that. And if you roll that all the way through to now, where, I went from having a long sort of gig as the MD, and all the kind of different sides of the show would kind of act quite independently of each other. Like the lighting designer would do his bit, and I'd do my bit, and the tour manager would do his bit, and all this, to what we have now, which is kind of a much more sort of like unified thing, which I oversee underneath Kane and Richard, his manager. Credits have evolved. So I might go, look, I really want to see the music and the visuals line up and be much more of a kind. I don't want to just walk onto a stage and just have a bunch of flashing lights behind us. How do we do it in a way that's like, much more kind of like, sequenced and just connected. And I think what can happen in those scenarios, in my experience, is that, especially when you're trying to prove yourself, is you just have to kind of, I would hate the idea that you'd limit yourself in terms of what you give input on based on what your credit is. You know what I mean? So it's like, and that's kind of always been my attitude, really, and probably to the annoyance of many people. but I think in hindsight, then there's sometimes difficult conversations where you go back in. I would never stop a tour in the middle of the tour and go, hey, fucking hell, I'm doing all this extra work. Like, I want to be respected and credited properly, and I want this and this and this, and I want more money. I think afterwards you come back and you take stock, and if people want to pick you up again and go forward, then you go, hey, well, like, this is what I feel confident doing, and this is where I want to be placed in terms of, authority to speak. And that's not just about money. That's also just about clearness, because, when a lot of the shows where I've been the MD, but actually kind of within the artist eyes, kind of being the aggregator of everyone. Like I've walked into rehearsals on day one with a production manager, and I've been introduced as the MD, but actually I'm this kind of more all over the place guy, and it can create a bit of friction in the first instance, because that person's going, well, why are you talking to me about the lights, or what the riser sizes are, or what the all this kind of stuff, and so I think, like, I'm less concerned about the sort of money aspect of it, and I just think the credit side of it is important, just so there's a sort of clarity amongst everyone that's working together, and that's kind of all I care about.
Yeah, I can do it.
Yeah,
I hear you.
Good point, Sam.
Super. So we're kind of run out of time now, but there is one more question that I really wanted to ask you guys, and it can be super quick. What's the one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's starting out in your area? I'll start with Dan.
Okay, really simple. Use what you've got. There are no rules. If you want to make visuals, pick up the thing around you that makes pictures. Okay, there is a load of snobbery out there that you need some kind of software, you need some kind of computer. You don't, if you've got 2 DVD players or you've got 2 VHS players and you've got a projector and 2 leads, like, just make it happen, and just follow your instincts about what inspires you, and don't worry too much about the tech side. Just make things happen and get excited about it.
Tom?
Keep doing what you're doing, because the moment that you stop doing it is the moment that you won't get to the place that you want to be. And it doesn't matter how small a gig is, or how big a gig is, or how abstract something is that you're working on. Keep doing it, because all of that little bit of experience is going to come back at some point, and you're going to be like, Jesus, I'm so glad I did that. And learn your Ableton shortcuts as well, if you could.
Blue?
I think just to be like a massive romantic about what the possibilities are. It's like I think when I was young, I had a VHS of Prince, Sign of the Times, and Talking Heads, Stop Making Sense, and I had Hendrix and Monterey, and they were recorded off the TV from my mum. And when I was I would have been about 7 years old or something like that, and it's like I just thought those people walked on clouds. Like to me, I was like, they're superstars, those people, and those shows are so moving. And so for me, it's like I never lost touch of that. And so if I can be a part of sort of facilitating the people that I see around me that are capable of kind of moving people like that, then I want to do that. And it's like, just like, I think the worst thing you can be in this world, in this kind of space, is someone who's kind of what's the word? Kind of like just sort of mathematical about how you do it. It's like push the limitations of everything all the time. Like, if you can imagine it, there must be a way of transferring that over. And I think if you have that attitude, then generally all the people around you start to have that attitude as well. And I think that's the kind of space where amazing things start to happen and stuff. So yeah.
That's really nice. And finally, Bob.
Real quick. Maybe don't chase other people's dreams, chase your own. Look after your own kung fu, and don't really think about anyone else's. That's it.
Super. Nice. Well, thanks so much for coming, guys. This brings us to the end. I hope you've all had a good evening, and everyone that's watching as well. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us, guys.
More diversity.